What's up, guys? Four Corners here. It is Ray doing a solo show talking about updated sort of takes and feedback from the team after two preseason games. Appreciate you listening. You can find me online at Rayvon Hackshaw. You can find the channel at Four Corner Media. I have been sick. I This is probably the best I have been, and I would not say I'm 100% still. So I'm going to try to be brief so that my voice holds up and go line by line on each player and kind of discuss how I see them after these two games. So, not to bury the lead, starting off with Nikola Jokic, I feel like he looks great. That said, he looks a little, I don't want to say out of shape, right? He's an NBA athlete, and especially at the center position, I think putting on weight is something that uh, it can help you as much as it can hurt you. But he does look like he's laboring a little bit, going into his age 30 season. I think that's not unreasonable for any human being, honestly. You don't get faster and quicker as you age. That said, he looks like he's able to do everything that he wants to do on the basketball court, scoring whenever he feels like it, creating opportunities for others whenever he feels like it. Going next to Jamal Murray, he looks really impressive, actually. I know in a lot of interviews he's spoken about how he is actually the same in terms of preparation, in terms of his approach, and all these things. But he looks so much more assertive. I think, especially in doing the little things like defensively, so far, especially considering that it's two preseason games, Jamal's looked really good. He's hitting a lot of his shots, which is also kind of the other end of that order for him is can you be, maybe not playoff Jamal in October, November, but can you be 70-80% of that? And I think he looks like he's in line for what will be a big year. I'm really impressed with Jamal. So if you are a holder of Jamal Murray stock, I think you are feeling pretty good right now. Going down next in the list, it's Aaron Gordon. I would say Aaron Gordon's stock for me is a little low for the season. It's not that he isn't scoring the ball well. I think he's continuing to develop his shot and it looks good. He's really been able to do everything he wants to offensively. However, where I don't think he looked as good, I think would be on the defensive end, and particularly in his just mobility, agility, setting out the second game with, I think it was a calf issue. I don't think it's a great look for him. And in general, my outlook on him is that I think he's going to continue to polish up offensively and as a shooter. And I think when he is fresh and has the will to do so, is going to have a big impact on the game from a physicalities perspective. However, I don't know if that's something he's going to be able to bring on a night to night basis. And if he does, I don't know if that's something that's going to be sustainable for him, particularly when we're talking about keeping up with athletic perimeter players, quicker guys. I think that's going to be a tough thing for him this year. It's going to take a lot of concerted effort and focus. And I think there is going to continue to be a trade off for him between his offensive gains and his defensive. I don't want to say he's falling off. I think that would be an overstatement. But the ways in which he's only going to have so much energy to put out on the court. Moving on to Cam Johnson, I think he is. It's funny they look so. I think they have a lot of talking about Cam and Aaron. I think they have similar strengths and weaknesses in how they're both really smart players. I think they're both good shooters at this point in their career. At the same time, I think Cam as well is a guy who, so I think people are going to constantly be making the Michael Porter comparisons, and I think Cam is a smarter player. So let's talk about that defensively. Defensively, I think he's doing a better job of keeping it conservative, keeping things in front of him, keeping things contained, and I think that's beneficial. At the same time, I don't think he's going to be someone who is a stopper per se, particularly against other forwards who excel in the mid range or excel with a pull up jumper, especially from three. So I think about guys like Kawhi Leonard. I think DeMar DeRozan, for example, would have a field day with the Nuggets forwards, talking about these two. Just not saying that Denver is lost defensively, because they're not lost. These two, they know what they're doing. I just The seeds of doubt are in me about whether or not they can, even if they know what they're doing, be quick enough and mobile enough to cut people off, to um, force turnovers, to block shots, to get steals, that sort of thing, to create defensive plays. I think they'll be more playing on the mistakes of other players more than they are going to force those mistakes. Moving on to Jonas, I really like Jonas. I think he does a lot of things on the court that are very impressive, almost Jokic. They've been looking for a Jokic light for so long. And I think Jonas does a lot of the same things, is that once he gets the ball in his hands, he can do a lot of creation on his own. He can get his own shot. At the same time, he's a good passer. He has good vision. He's a good screen setter. He's a great rebounder when the ball goes his way. And I think he's going to be a good anchor for that bench unit. At the same time, there is a big vulnerability that I think the team's going to have when Jonas gets put in space and teams try to take advantage of his lack of pace. Now, I don't think that's always going to be a deal breaker. A lot of centers have a similar challenge, and that's just something very normal, is that, like, you're probably going to be playing a lot of drop coverage when in man with Jonas. And I think, David Adelman spoke a lot about playing more zone. And I think Jonas is probably going to be a big focus of that, in terms of keeping him out of situations that don't make a lot of sense for him. Now, we haven't seen a lot of that zone in the two preseason games, but it's just something that I think about. He hasn't looked great in space. And additionally, he sometimes struggles in a way that is very catastrophic. And I don't want to say, it's not that I'm saying he's bad. It's that when Jonas has a bad play, they seem to come in bunches. Whether it's him picking up fouls, which I think is related to his lack of mobility, or turnovers that often lead to runouts for the other team. And some of that is chemistry as well. There were a few times where Jonas and Julian, trying to run a two-man game of sorts, had a lot of miscommunications, both on, and well, that isn't something that I think is always going to be the case. However, I do think there will be a lot of nights where Jonas gets in foul trouble, and there will be a lot of nights where, if they struggle to get him the ball, especially in that bench unit, they're going to not really reap the benefits of having Jonas on the court, but are still going to suffer a lot of the costs. And so, getting him the ability to get up the court and get Jonas the ball and play through him, I think, is going to be critical in how well the bench does, as long as he is a part of that unit. Zeke, okay. Also, I'm going in order of salary, if that makes sense. Zeke, actually looks good. I think in terms of, this is all in the terms, adjusted terms of the Zeke experience. But Zeke Naji, I think, has played a lot of great defense. He hasn't had a lot of turnover issues. He's still not someone I want to play through in the way I would want to play through Jonas, but he's had some impressive defensive plays. He's had some decent finishes, and I don't think he's very high in the rotation right now, but I do think when used appropriately, Zeke could be a piece that Denver isn't afraid of. Now, the phrase "used appropriately," what does that mean? I've said this for a lot of for many years at this point, and I am going to stick to it. I don't think he should really be playing the center position, at the very least, not and excuse me, not in a context where he is the solitary big. For example, Jonas with Jonas, they went to some bench units that had him and Peyton Watson at the four. And I think that made some amount of sense because Jonas can make up for a lot of Peyton's lack of weight, for lack of a better term, and kind of pick up some of that rebounding slack, even though we will get to Peyton. But he's been pretty good on the board so far. And I think guys like Peyton can use their athleticism and mobility to kind of cover for some of Jonas's weaknesses in terms of defending in space and that sort of thing. However, I think Zeke could be a competent big when paired with another. Think about a guy like Doron Holmes, and I'll get to later as well. But I thought Zeke looked the best in minutes where he was playing next to Duran as a guy who neither of whom are really true fives, guys you feel good about letting them match up with other big men, by themselves. But he can be part of a complementary, skill set. Moving on to Christian Brown. Christian, I think, looks pretty good. I think if you watched him last year, he'll do a lot of the same things. He's running the floor. He is playing good defense, sometimes great defense. And although he isn't always the best sticking in front of guys that are quicker than him, I think Denver is going to continue to struggle with that in terms of defending players who are quick in that way. But other than that, I really see no issues with Christian and how he's played so far and what I can expect from him this season. Especially if I factor in the fact that I don't think the starters have been giving 110% effort in 2 preseason games. So moving on to Peyton, I think he's been doing a great job as well, and he looks like he's going to be in line for what I would think of as a pretty big role, an important role in this team, particularly when you look up and down the roster. What I think they lack most is athleticism, is that elite athlete at various positions. And Peyton provides some of that juice in a way that almost no one else does on the roster. He's gotten a little bit better with his strength. I don't know if he looks necessarily a ton heavier, but he looks stronger with the ball and stronger finishing around the rim. And just more poised, hasn't shot any threes yet. So it's hard to say, is it there? Is it not there? But particularly in the way that he looked with the starters, because Aaron Gordon did sit out the second game. I think Peyton has managed to be really thoughtful about stepping into various roles depending on what the situation demands, and recognizing that they are going to need a lot from him, but that they don't need everything from him, if that makes sense. They don't need him to necessarily be, the number one guy or an all-star or anything like that. But the fact that David Adelman has empowered the team in a broad sense to do more ball handling, take more individual responsibility for things like of that nature. I think Peyton is one of the biggest beneficiaries of that, and he looks to be doing a good job in growing into a role that I think is going to be critical for the Nuggets' quest for another title. Moving on to Deron Holmes, Deron is mostly playing bench, not even bench minutes, it's garbage time minutes. So it's hard to quantify how good he does or does not look, but he seems to be moving decently well. His shot seems very reliable, and as much as it seems like they're easing him into play, I think Duran looks like a capable NBA player. He looks so like someone who can be complementary to other bigs as well, so that he might be able to share the floor with Jonas or Jokic. He did a great job, getting back to Zeke a little bit. Zeke and Duran seem like a really good pairing. And I'm not saying that either of those guys, it's not a statement about their individual talents so much as you get the best out of each of them when they're together. Because Duran's not the biggest guy, Zeke's not the biggest guy, but they have complementary skill sets. So Zeke, his shot hasn't been super consistent of the last 3 years. Well, Duran's is pretty much knocked down, and you may not want Duran doing all of the dirtiest of work in terms of I don't know if I could rely on him being a center, working solo on the boards. But when you have Zeke and Duran together, you've got that kind of backside help on the boards, and you have the collective length to the point where I think you can get by. And Duran is somebody who's smart enough, has the IQ to the point where you can play through him a little bit offensively in the way that Zeke isn't wetting the bed entirely this preseason, but I think Duran will be a better fit for that kind of role. So plus stonks for him is what I'll say. Next, moving on to Julian Strother. If I've given a lot of positive ratings so far, Julian is probably someone I would give a downgrade just based on preseason, not because he is. Sometimes you see someone and you say they're playing badly, and it's because they're making a bunch of catastrophic errors. For Julian, it's that he's not playing perfectly. I'm not saying he's playing error free, but the biggest thing is that I'm still waiting for him to become the thing that we expect. For him to be a shot maker, for him to be a creator, and for him to, because when he's playing, he's always aggressive. But the issue is, how often is he genuinely being productive? It's not often enough, if I'm being frank. He is working hard defensively, but it hasn't entirely come to fruition on that end either. And while he does provide some athleticism, certainly some quickness, certainly some off the dribble, dribble penetration game. And I think Denver really needs that. It's hard to say where he fits in if you can't rely on him for at least one thing in particular. Especially when you're talking about role players, you're talking about bench players, there usually should be something that no matter what, I know that Valanciunas is going to rebound. No matter what, I know that Zeke is going to play defense. No matter what, I know that Christian is going to play defense and going to run the floor. No matter what, I know Peyton Watson is going to play defense. He's going to run the floor. He's going to um, challenge even high level offensive players with his length and athleticism. With Julian, I don't really know what I'm going to get. I don't know if I'm going to get a lot out of him. I don't know if I'm just going to get 8 minutes of a mediocre shot making clip and a lot of aggression and a lot of effort, but a couple of fouls. So he's still young, and I feel like there's still a lot of room for his career to develop. Like, I'm not out on him as a long term prospect. However, I don't see. I think it's a big question mark if he can carve out a role in the current structure of the team. Excuse me, I'm just going to have a little chamomile tea. Okay, so getting to Bruce Brown. He played point guard the last time he was in Denver, and I think Denver is looking for him to reprise that role as the backup point guard. At the same time, he looks out of sorts when it comes to doing that sort of on ball, managing the game, controlling the game, what it means to be a floor general. If he It doesn't look good right now, but I'm willing to chalk some of that up to rust. At the same time, he is doing a lot of the little things, the being that all around glue guy that we know him to be. I think he is doing that. His defense has been really good. He's rebounding at a high level. He's pushing the pace. He's making smart reads in terms of being a cutter and being a movement guy. So for Bruce, I think it's a wait and see on how well he can play backup point. But it is a little bit questionable. But what I don't think is questionable is that Bruce will be a part of the rotation and that he does provide a lot that Denver can use. Whether or not he's the lead ball handler in those secondary units, I don't know. Tim Hardaway Jr., he's a shooter. I don't know if I have much else to say about Tim. He's not my favorite player, and I don't think he's a guy I think who would benefit the most from playing with Jokic. And the ideal role for him, in my mind, might not even be being an every night player so much as being a guy who is a spot starter. For example, if Christian Brown is out, I think it would make a lot of sense for him to step into a starting role, get a lot of clean looks from Jokic, from Jamal, from Cam, from Aaron, and thrive in a role where he's primarily just tasked with being a shooter. It's not that he's not willing to be a defender. I just don't think he's particularly impressive. If he's going to play small forward, I think he's a little undersized at that. But at the two, I think he's passable. Um, yeah, I'll keep it pretty simple there. Kessler Edwards, I think, has been really impressive. Uh, I if you watched a lot, um, I'm trying to think about the type of player I see him as, but Kessler Edwards, he's playing great defense. He's a great athlete. He is sort of the kind of guy I like to have off of a two-way. Like, if he could find his way into one of those spots, I think that would be great. A lot on the way that Spencer Jones stepped onto the court and just did a lot of the grunt work for the team when he was needed last year. I think Kessler Edwards can do a lot of the same things. You know, if you can play great defense and be physical and rebound and run the floor and attack the basket when you have the opportunity to do so, and if you make the occasional three, that's great. I think Kessler Edwards fits the bill. You know, and I would say a similar thing about Spencer is that both of those guys are are great guys to have when you need someone to bring off like the deep bench from your reserves, because the game doesn't have to be about them, and they can be very effective without making the game about themselves, and I think that's really valuable. um, that will contrast with a couple of the guys a little bit later. Moses Brown, I he's really tall. If for some reason Denver has center issues, if Jokic has to sit, if Jonas has to sit, and Denver needs another guy who can just be like, hey, I'm, I'm a true 7-footer. I can set screens. I'm a lob threat. I'm going to rebound. I think Moses Brown fits the bill. He's thin, but not too thin. So I'm pretty happy with him as another sort of deep bench addition. Um, Hunter Tyson is right there in the Julian Strawther camp of, I understand this player in theory, but in practice it just isn't there yet. Hunter gives a lot of great energy. He rebounds well for his size. He hustles extremely hard. He knows where to be on the court. You know, he's a smart player. He's not a great athlete, but he does his best to overcome that with effort. However, you got to make the shots, and he just isn't making the shots that you would expect someone of a player of his. You look at his game at lower levels, you look at his game at Clemson, and when he has good G League games, and in the occasional moments where he looks good in Denver, it's when he's making shots. So if he's not going to make shots, I just don't see him having a genuine role on the team. And honestly, I think he is circling the drain in terms of, I don't think his contract is guaranteed next year. I think it's a team option. I doubt they pick it up at this rate, but I hope he does. You know, things start to kick in for him. I think it would be nice. It's always nice to have another shooter. And if he can be another shooter, I think he would start to threaten a number of other players on the roster because of the willingness that he has to not only be a shooter but do the little things. Coming around towards the back end of the roster, we have Jalen Pickett, who I think had a great first preseason game and a kind of rough second preseason game. When he can get into his comfort zones, I think he does a great job of, we talked a little bit earlier about Bruce Brown not being the best at controlling the game, at being a game manager. I think Pickett is much more the mentality of that sort of floor general. And while, people make fun of booty ball, I do think that his post game is kind of valuable in the sense that it gives that second unit another opportunity to have structure and stability from a player who was willing to create for himself and for others, but is going to look for others first, if that makes sense. There are a lot of guys on the team, or just in the league in general. I think about Julian, for example, who probably has even more talent for being a creator just because of Julian's a much better athlete, and has better physical tools, and Julian's ability to get into the paint at will is much more consistent. He's quicker, but at the same time, I don't think he has the patience or the mindfulness that Pickett has. And while Jalen is shorter and doesn't have that athleticism, he is making some tough shots. I think that's also a bit impressive. He's made some tough shots early in the preseason. Where he really began to struggle, I would say, is in response to ball pressure. And I kind of brings me back to this point where you look up and down the Nuggets roster, there isn't a lot of athleticism, especially from the perimeter, from the ball handling players. You talk about Peyton um, and Christian in their regular rotation. I think that those are the main two guys who have um, that sort of genuine quickness and speed on the floor. No, it's not to say that Aaron or Cam or other guys aren't good athletes. It's just a lot of the team is older, and when you round, 28, 29, 30, 31 years old, you're not going to be as fast as you were at 24. And Peyton and Christian are in their athletic primes. But to circle back, Pickett lacks. So you think about your point guard rotation. You got Jamal Murray, who what I do think is in really good shape. I think is better prepared than he has been most years. I There is a level if you want to contend with Jamal Murray. I think a lot of teams have resorted to ball pressure and pressuring full court. And I think the same is true with Jalen. And he really struggled with that in the second preseason game against the Raptors, is that he struggled with the ability to, and this is why athleticism is important, is that when you're a great athlete, you can kind of just blow by guys. And when when they press you, you go by them, and it puts them in a compromised position. And I'm not someone who believes that this is a deal breaker for Jalen as a player. However, I do think it's something that they're going to have to work through collectively. You have to think about, okay, when teams are pressing, whoever the five man is or the bigs, the forwards, they've got to come up floor a little bit. Somebody has to come up and be that um, set, rather than getting into the offense once you've got the ball across and settled down and did all your stuff. Start setting screens at three-quarters court, at half court, and once you do break those presses, really attacking whatever vulnerabilities teams are going to have off that, I think is going to be really important. And looking to their outlet men, especially if the initiative is to spread the ball handling responsibilities, have outlets who can take that ball and then respond to that pressure as well, and also go and score. In every high school coach will tell you the ball moves faster than the man. In passing, in thoughtfulness, and just execution, I think as a team can overcome a lot of the vulnerabilities that Denver has from a point guard perspective, both with Jamal and with Jalen. I think it's something that they'll have to work on because it's bit them both in the ass. Whether it's Jamal, especially like in the playoff series the last few years, that's consistently something teams are going to. That's giving Jamal problems, and it's something that gives Jalen problems because as much as I don't mind him using his body to protect the ball, but he has to be mindful about how he does it. You can't bring the ball up in the corners, for example. That's the easiest way to get trapped. You can't turn your back to the center of the floor because it kind of cuts off your vision. Things like that. How to anticipate the pressure and make sure that if you're Jalen Pickett, if you're Jamal Murray, you are coordinating that press break. You are coordinating having other guys come up to be outlets and be screeners and use the use the opponent's pressure to their own detriment. I think that's going to be big. And to kind of round out, I mean, the last two, I mean, I don't know if they're Tamar Bates and let's see, Curtis Jones. I don't love them. I'm going to be honest. I feel like they're both a mix of unimpressive and ball dominant in a way that I don't think makes sense for what their role would be on the team. And Denver has so many ball handling options before they get to them. You've got, between Jamal and Bruce and Jalen, you've got three options, but I think we've seen Christian Brown kind of run point before. Um, we might see Peyton in a more on ball role. You might see Tim in a more on ball role. So I don't know about those two, but that's back of the roster stuff. Anyway, those are my thoughts after the first two preseason games. To kind of summarize, generally they look good. I think they'll be a good team this year. They'll win a lot of games. I think they're going to be one of the best offensive teams in the league. I think the starters in particular, I think they will be the best starting five offensively in basketball. I can see them being top three collectively, like as a team. Um, I could see them being bottom 10 defensively, if I'm being honest. I'm happy that Peyton is playing as well as he is because I think that raises my maybe they could be 15th, but unless they really make an effort of it, I I have a lot of questions about their ability to be a consistently good defensive team. And when I say make an effort of it, so are they going to more zone on a regular basis based on matchups and situations and personnel and being smart about knowing their personnel in terms of defensive assignments? Are they protecting their weaknesses defensively? Like, are they using zones to kind of keep Jonas out of situations that don't make sense for him? Are they leaning into units that do kind of thrive defensively? Like, what I'd like to see is Bruce, Christian, and Peyton together. I would be really interested in that to see how they can function as a more aggressive, assertive perimeter defensive group. I don't know, because it's one of those things that it's real. That's a real to be determined. Um, I think Peyton will play a lot with the starters. That's something I could see looking really good is Peyton in Aaron's place, and there's a lot of conversation about who the stagger will be. I think it could be Cam. I think it could be Jamal. I also think it could be Aaron. I think that would free up Aaron to do a lot of the he's a better offensive creator than I think a lot of teams opposing teams will give him credit for, and that'll give him a lot of opportunity to kind of be in his bag in that way, and demand a little bit less of him defensively, if that makes sense, where you can have a kind of plus defender with the starters. Maybe the swap is Cam as well. But I think Peyton in place of one of Aaron or Cam, I think that'll be a really good lineup for Denver and one that's a little bit more balanced, and one they might rely on when they need to get stops as well as score. Anyway, this has been me talking about the preseason takes, and I will have this up. We're recording this on October 8th. I appreciate you hanging out with me, especially while I am not feeling my best. And yeah, drink lots of water, and I hope you have a great day. I'll see you later.